now I'm very happy to introduce Elaine Alec. Thank you so much for joining us today, and Merry Christmas!
Merry Christmas. So happy
Or
to be
Happy
here with
Holidays.
you.
Yeah. whatever you say to celebrate your words. Okay. So tell us your story of hope.
Oh my gosh. So I've been on quite a journey. I'm writing my second book right now. And my second book is all about self-determination as a pathway to healing. And I've been looking at where I'm at and the time of year it is right now. I used to really struggle through the holidays. Christmas was a really hard time for me for a number of reasons. One, just, growing up and not having much. But Christmas was when when I was 19 years old, my mom had a stroke when I was 19. And when that happened, I just slipped into full blown depression. And I just started drinking really heavily at that time. And every time it would snow and Christmas would start coming up, I would get triggered. And so I would always drink really heavily through the holidays and just suffered from really bad depression and was diagnosed with seasonal affective disorder or with SAD. And so, it's been really hard, but I've started to work on, healing and dealing with a lot of my trauma that I've dealt with from a child through my teen years, through experiencing the loss of my mom, when I was 19. Even though she didn't pass away, I felt like I lost her because she was no longer able to speak. And so I really had to go through and deal with a lot of that stuff. And I was diagnosed with all of these different mental health disorders, and I'm on anxiety medication right now that I started again 2 years ago. But my mental health has struggled, and I've dealt with my alcoholism. But now I'm at a place where I feel like I'm living a completely different life because I decided to get serious about focusing on my feelings. I didn't want to do it. I ran away from it for so long. And the more I ran away from it and stuffed it, the harder it felt like my life got, the more dismal it felt like my life was. And so being able to work through feelings and deal with them and cry and find people to talk to and do ceremony for myself, not needing to have somebody do ceremony for me anymore, but being able to do ceremony for myself has really helped. And so, now I get to celebrate our first Christmas in this house, which is a house that we bought. Like, I never thought I would ever buy a house ever. And so we're celebrating our first Christmas in a house that we bought with our kids, and we have, just family here. And, I haven't slipped into that sadness. And I think this is the first time in a long time that, I'm actually not feeling, even though I should be, I'm not feeling the amount of grief that I usually do, because I experienced another loss last Christmas, which, if I hadn't been dealing with my emotions, I probably would have gone off the deep end from that loss that I experienced last Christmas season. So, yeah, I mean, I just practice gratitude every day for where I'm at right now. And because I've been doing that work, it provides me all the tools that I need to get through whatever challenges come up for me.
Yeah. Well, tell us some of those tools that you use when you didn't have support around you.
Well, so one of the tools I use is Alcoholics Anonymous. So I was really active in AA when I first got sober, and I would go to meetings 3 times a week. And one of the things I had to learn with that is if my problem was drinking, then I should go into spaces where other people deal with drinking. And so Some of the AA meetings I went to, I really didn't like. I didn't like being there. I didn't like the people that were there or the messages that they were sharing. And so I would find another meeting. And, sometimes I would just sit through meetings just to be there and listen for the message that I needed to hear for that moment. So AA really helped keep me sober when I was really new in my sobriety. And I still have to actively work at it. And doing the 12 steps. So you can actually go online and Google AA 12 steps. And you can even Google 12-step program workbook, and you can do like your own 12 steps without having to go to a meeting, but you still have to do the work. So that's one thing that I use to help maintain my sobriety. The other tool is on my Instagram. I follow the sober community, so #sober community. And there's sobriety for men and sobriety for women, and sobriety for 2S LGBTQIA+. There's also She Recovers, which is for women and those who identify as women. And they have free meetings. So there's a few different things I use for my sobriety and my mental health. The She Recovers website also has other meetings, not just for recovery from alcohol, but recovery from grief, recovery from food, recovery, like pretty much whatever it is that you might be struggling with there. If you're a woman or identify as a woman, they have so many different meetings and resources for you on their website. And I think that's sherecovers.org. And just reaching out to people who are going to be honest about where they're at in life. So those are most of the online programs that I use for my own tools, and then tools that I've just gathered over the years that I write down and remind myself about.
This is so inspiring for me because these are the steps I'm taking. And I am like, yay, I'm on the right path. I would say also having a sponsor has really helped me too, to be able to just get that extra support. Community is so important when you're taking the steps that are like-minded, I would believe. So thank you for sharing. I feel happy that I'm on this path, and looking at you as somebody that I admire, and looking at how much you've accomplished. It's exciting to be on this path. Can you tell us a little bit about your experiences with mental health and the mental health and addiction wellness community? What were some of the hurdles that you encountered on your path?
When I first was diagnosed with a mental health issue, I think I was about 17 years old, and I was diagnosed with cyclothymia, which is a form of bipolar. And so I would have, really high highs and low lows, and they would come and go in cycles. And so, when my lows would hit, I wouldn't be able to get out of bed. I couldn't function. I couldn't move or do anything. And then when I was on my highs, a total manic phase where I couldn't sleep. I had insomnia. My brain couldn't stop going. I felt really productive. And back then, because I'm 44 now, when I was diagnosed when I was 17, people didn't talk about it at the time. And so I felt like I was crazy and I didn't know who I could talk to. And my doctor told me at the time, my psychologist told me that 50% of what's happening to you has to do with your chemicals in your brain. And so we have medication to put you on for that. And 50% of what's going on with you is trauma. And so you have to be committed and willing to work through your trauma if you want to do this. And so if you get off if you work with your trauma and you deal with that, then you will be able to get off this medication that I'm prescribing you. And so that was really hard because I felt like I couldn't talk to anybody. And when I tried to go to access free resources on Reserve, there was a long wait list to see somebody and to talk to somebody. And I didn't know how, because I was so young, I didn't know how to navigate the system of trying to get a counselor or find a somebody that I could talk to. And I didn't want to talk to anybody in my community because I didn't want anybody to, start a rumor about me on my reserve that I was crazy. And so there were quite a few hurdles, when I first started, but I just focused um, on his message of, if you deal with your trauma, you can go off of this medication and you can, lead a life that where your mental health doesn't run your life. And so it took me a while, but I just focus on that. And so, I'm on medication now, but it's for my anxiety, but I'm no longer on the medication I was on before that dealt with my cyclothymia.
When it comes to your writing, I read your book, and you're working on another book as well. What do you hope to accomplish with your writing and your stories?
My I think it really ties into growing up in a time where nobody talked about things. And whenever people ask me, what would you tell your younger self? I always say I would share with them my story so that they know that they're not alone. Because the moment people connect with somebody else's story and realize they're not alone, that is what helps give people that little glimmer of hope that maybe, maybe I can get there too. She's been through the same thing I've been through. They've been through the same thing I've been through. So maybe I can do this too. And so through the first book, it was really about sharing my story to connect with people so that they knew they weren't alone. And so that they could see themselves, but also provide some of those tools in how I dealt with things and how I took accountability for my own healing and worked through that and forgave myself. Like the biggest thing is like, I've been through a lot of things, but I've also contributed to a lot of pain as well. And knowing that those were the hardest things that I had to work through. Like I could forgive others for hurting me, but I couldn't forgive myself for hurting others. And so going through the process of, yeah, I've done bad things in my life that I couldn't forgive myself for, and I beat myself up about, but I really worked hard on learning to be gentle, forgiving myself, understanding that I didn't know at the time how to deal with things. I didn't have the tools, and that if I knew then what I knew now, I know that I wouldn't have done what I did back then. And so understanding that, forgiving myself and working through that, just laying out my story in that way where I've been the victim, but I've also been the abuser, and that there is hope, that we can recover and move through those things and forgive ourselves, so that we can, so that we feel deserving of love and we feel deserving of a good life.
With the holidays, many people that might be in recovery or struggling with addiction or mental health issues may find themselves triggered by family members. Um, how did you combat some of those triggers? Can you share any tips with our viewers?
It's really hard, especially when you're just new in recovery or new in just feeling feelings and dealing with trauma. Um, I mean, it's hard to set healthy boundaries until you've learned to set them for yourself. And so, it's easy for me to say not take it personal, and it's easy for me to say don't react. But I think limiting the amount of time around people who might trigger you or do more harm. I've found in the beginning that it was good for me to just remove myself from those situations with family. And that was really hard to do, especially in Indigenous communities and any community, to tell your family that, you're not ready to be in a room with a bunch of people yet, because you're still so early in recovery and working on self. But I think that is probably one of the best things I ever did for myself, was being able to say no, and to not feeling like I have to show up, because I knew that if I did show up, it would impact my mental health. It would drag me into self-defeating behaviors and negative interactions, and it would make my blood boil. And when you're in a situation where you feel that, like, your adrenaline starts running, you're shaking because you're so angry or scared or upset, that that feeling that you get, that's actually harming your body's health. Like, it contributes to chronic disease, and it contributes to stress, which actually harms and shortens our lifespan. And so understanding that, like, trying to stay out of situations where I'm going to feel that, where I know that certain people are going to set me off and I'm going to feel those things, to give myself permission to take care of myself and not be in those spaces. And also to be okay with being the one that steps back, because I know sometimes when you step back, you get mad at everybody else because it's like, well, it's either them or me. And then you make people choose. And then you feel resentful because they're all doing their family thing and you are not a part of that. And then you feel resentful for those things. So when you make the choice to step back for your own health and well-being, to also not contribute to your own dysfunction by being resentful about it, by feeling gratitude for it, like, I'm taking this time to love myself, I'm taking this time to take care of myself. Maybe I can connect with somebody who supports me, maybe I can connect with those positive people who uplift me, and just finding ways to take care of, go to a movie,
Yeah.
cuddle, do things for yourself, and take care of yourself in those ways. That's the hardest thing for us to do, is to, like, set boundaries with family and not feel like we have to be there because it's family. But doing what you need to do to take care of yourself first and foremost.
On the other side of it, what advice would you give to parents or siblings or family members that have a person that they love struggling with addiction? What advice would you give to them about having some of those tough conversations, or do you suggest that?
Yeah, I mean, it's really hard. I remember when I was younger, I went to this celebration, this sobriety celebration at our community hall. And we had one of our old timers there who had, like, over 2 decades of sobriety. And they asked him a similar question about, like, you're doing so well, you've got all this sobriety, but you're struggling with a child, or he's not a child, he's a young adult, who's actively in recovery and actively, out on the streets, and you're not helping him. And how come you don't help him? And his response was that, he understood, as somebody who dealt with addictions and alcoholism, that he couldn't save his child, and that the best thing he could do is pray for them, and have faith that a higher power is taking care of them and this is their path. And I didn't understand it at the time, because I wasn't a parent, when he talked about that. But one of the things I've learned as a mom, and having 3 children, I have a 26-year-old, an 11-year-old, and a 4-year-old, is that our children, they don't belong to us. And we're here to guide them, but we can't make decisions for them. We can't tell them what to do. We can't tell them how to live their life. We're just here as a guide. And the only thing we can do is teach them everything that we know, and hoping that eventually they'll fall back on those teachings. But the work has to be done by themselves. We can't force them to heal. We can't force them to get over their trauma. And a lot of times, I think, as parents, when we see our kids struggling, we begin to blame ourselves. And so we try to save them because we think it's our fault, and we punish ourselves for what our children are going through. And a lot of times it becomes more about us as the parent or the caregiver than it is about them. And so we want to help them for our own, not benefit, but for our own comfort, that we've done our best, and that we're constantly going over and above and beyond and sacrificing. And and doing all of this stuff to save our child, but we can't. Like, the only thing we can do, like, is faith has been my number one anchor in this life, is that faith in our teachings, that that we choose our parents before we come to this earth, and we choose that path. And that, even when it's really hard, all the hard things that happen, I think, oh, I wouldn't have chose that for myself. I wouldn't have chose to be abused or hurt or abandoned. But those things really made me, experiencing my alcoholism and my mental health issues and the abuse that I went through. Those things made me who I am, and have contributed to the way I show up in the world and the way I share my stories. And I wouldn't be here without some of those things. And I know that it sucks. I didn't deserve it. And that doesn't make it an excuse for all of those things that have happened. But I think just realizing that having that faith that we're exactly where we're meant to be, experiencing exactly what we're meant to experience, and doing what we need to do. And just having a faith in a higher power, and doing our best, and knowing that that our best is good enough, I think, and not beating ourselves up about it.
Elaine, thank you so much. Talking to you feels like a nice, warm, fuzzy blanket. Thank you for sharing everything, your wisdom and your advice. Now, if people want to check out your books, your work, please let our viewers know where they can find you.
Sure. So my website is www.elainealec.com, and you can find everything on that page, the links to my social media, and the links to where to buy my book. And you can sign up for my newsletter, and I send a newsletter out twice a month, and it shares all of my trainings. It shares different blogs and highlights different artists every month. And so if you sign up for that, then I always share everything that I'm up to in that newsletter.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it, and I hope you have a great holiday.
Thank you.